The grand corridors of power are rarely silent, yet the truest shifts in authority often occur in the absolute quiet of a single passing moment, unnoticed by the crowds but deeply understood by those who navigate the treacherous waters of dynastic survival. In the public eye, the ancient institution presents a carefully choreographed facade of absolute unity, a seamless continuity where traditions are preserved and generational transitions are handled with the utmost dignity. We look at the sweeping lawns, the glittering state receptions, and the synchronized appearances of a family that has symbolized national stability for centuries, believing that what we see is a reflection of total harmony. But beneath that polished surface, away from the flashing cameras and the cheering spectators, a quiet and meticulous realignment of power is taking place, a constitutional restructuring that is transforming the very nature of the monarchy from within. It is a transformation driven by a relentless vision of modernity, efficiency, and pragmatism, one that increasingly views the sentimental traditions of the past as liabilities rather than assets. This hidden evolution does not announce itself with grand declarations or sudden, dramatic overhauls. Instead, it manifests in fleeting gestures, brief interactions, and strategic briefings that signal a profound change in leadership. As the public remains focused on the pageantry and the historic symbols of the crown, the true architecture of the future reign is already being built behind closed doors, stone by stone, policy by policy. This broadcast will explore these deep undercurrents, examining how a new era is being forged in the shadows of the current one, and what this means for the individuals caught in the machinery of royal duty. If you value deep investigative insights into the changing dynamics of global institutions and want to stay informed on the stories that shape our understanding of power, take a brief moment to subscribe to our channel and join our community for regular updates. To understand the scale of this internal transformation, one must look closely at the delicate balance between the current sovereign and the heir to the throne. A relationship that defines not just the family, but the state itself. Historically, a reigning monarch holds absolute sway over the institution, with their court serving as the epicenter of all major decisions, long-term strategies, and institutional policies. The current king has long championed a specific vision for the future, one centered on a unified, extended family structure that projects warmth, inclusivity, and a sense of collective belonging reminiscent of the 19th century domestic ideal. In this traditional view, every member of the family, regardless of their official standing, has a place within the grand tapestry of the crown, contributing to a sense of national continuity and shared history. It is a philosophy that prioritizes family cohesion and the preservation of long-standing arrangements, believing that a visible, united front is the best defense against modern scrutiny. However, this classic approach is increasingly colliding with a starkly different philosophy, one that is modern, highly protective of the institution's public standing, and entirely unsentimental about internal family dynamics. The heir to the throne represents this new paradigm, operating with a lean, highly focused administration that prioritizes public accountability, financial transparency, and a significantly streamlined operation. This ideological divergence has created an extraordinary dynamic within the palace, where two distinct courts, with two fundamentally different visions of the future, are actively managing the present reality of the crown. The tension between these two competing philosophies is not merely academic. It plays out in the real-time management of assets, public statements, and the overall direction of the family's public identity. While the king seeks to maintain stability and honor the commitments of the past, the heirs team is increasingly looking forward, setting the terms for the next chapter of the monarchy with a directness that has occasionally caught the current administration by surprise. This forward-looking approach is characterized by a willingness to address difficult institutional questions directly, even when it means challenging established practices or reversing long-standing privileges enjoyed by extended family members. For the heir, the survival of the crown depends entirely on its relevance and economic viability in a rapidly changing world, meaning that every expense, every property allocation, and every public association must be rigorously justified. This creates a fascinating and complex atmosphere within the palace walls, where traditional courtly deference is constantly being balanced against the sharp requirements of modern public relations. It is an environment where a simple public appearance can carry multiple layers of meaning, serving simultaneously as a demonstration of family solidarity for the public and a subtle assertion of new authority for those watching from the inside. This complex interplay of power and tradition is further complicated by the realities of health and the inevitable passage of time, which naturally accelerate questions about the future structure of the leadership. When circumstances necessitate a temporary shift in responsibilities, the distribution of influence within the institution inevitably begins to alter, drawing more attention and expectation toward the next generation of leadership. During these periods, the clarity, decisiveness, and strategic vision of the heir's court become even more pronounced, establishing a blueprint for how the institution will eventually be governed. Yet, as the current sovereign resumes full duties and reasserts control over the traditional mechanisms of state, a delicate process of recalibration must take place as the central office seeks to pull back the authority that had naturally flowed outward. This constant ebb and flow of influence between the reigning sovereign and the future monarch creates a compelling narrative of institutional adaptation, where both sides must navigate their roles with immense skill, mutual respect, and a shared commitment to the ultimate survival of the crown. As we move deeper into this exploration, we will examine the specific events, internal debates, and strategic decisions that illustrate this historic shift, revealing how the modern monarchy is preparing itself for the challenges of tomorrow while maintaining its vital link to the past. The shifting tides of authority within the historic walls of the palace found a striking, almost cinematic expression during a recent high-profile gathering, an event that perfectly captured the duality of modern royal life. To the casual observer watching the arrivals on television, it was a moment of pure warmth and traditional family solidarity, the kind of scene the current monarch thoroughly enjoys. The prince arrived at the reception with his characteristic poise, navigating the crowd of dignitaries and relatives with practiced ease before spotting his cousin, Princess Beatrice, in the gathering. Leaning in with an air of absolute familiarity, he greeted her with a quick, affectionate peck on each cheek, a gesture so rapid and natural that it lasted only a fraction of a second, easily missed by anyone not paying close attention. It was the quintessential image of a unified family, an effortless display of kinship that seemed to validate the king's long-held belief that personal affection and shared history can bridge any institutional divide. Yet, for those familiar with the deeper, more calculating realities of court politics, this fleeting moment of public warmth carried a deeply ironic undercurrent, drawing immediate comparisons to classic stories of strategic betrayal, where an embrace serves as the prelude to a definitive shift in fortune, even as that affectionate greeting was being captured by the cameras. A far more cold and calculated maneuver was being executed behind the scenes by the prince's highly disciplined communications team. With precise timing, senior aides were actively briefing journalists at a major national newspaper, outlining a radical and uncompromising vision for the future of the family's extensive property portfolio. The briefing made it explicitly clear that the current arrangement regarding the substantial rent-free residences occupied by Princess Beatrice and her sister, Princess Eugenie, was deemed completely unacceptable by the future king. For years, the current monarch had quietly subsidized these multi-million-pound properties, viewing the financial support of his nieces as a traditional family obligation funded through historical estates. The strategic leak delivered a stark and unmistakable message to the public and the wider family alike, stating in no uncertain terms that such multi-million-pound financial privileges would be permanently dismantled the moment the prince ascends the throne. This was not merely a debate over housing logistics, it was a public declaration of an impending policy change, making it clear that a temporary gesture of familial affection must never be mistaken for a permanent endorsement of historical entitlement. This bold public projection of future policy highlights an extraordinary and growing phenomenon within the modern palace, where the heir's court appears to be operating almost as a shadow administration, independently setting its own long-term objectives. Unlike previous generations, where the Prince of Wales maintained a highly deferential distance from the active governance of the crown, the current heir routinely and explicitly articulates exactly how the institution will change under his eventual reign. This habit of briefing the press on future plans has caused immense frustration within the King's central office, an administration that values traditional discretion and firmly believes that public focus should remain entirely on the current sovereign. Historically, the current king had meticulously participated in the collective fiction that his own mother would live forever, never allowing his team to cast forward or publicly speculate on his own future rule out of deep respect for her position. The prince, however, operates with an entirely different sense of urgency, frequently utilizing the phrase "when I am king" to signal a looming, sweeping modernization of the entire royal apparatus. This proactive stance creates a complex and often competitive dynamic between the two courts, as the future monarch steadily builds his own distinct identity as a modernizer, refusing to wait in the wings while outdated traditions compromise the long-term viability of the crown. The stark reality of these competing administrative strategies became undeniably apparent during a highly complex diplomatic situation involving a major state visit to Saudi Arabia. The prince's team had invested an immense amount of logistics and institutional capital into organizing this high-profile tour, viewing it as a critical platform to project international statesmanship and secure vital diplomatic objectives. However, just as the prince's aircraft was in mid-air en route to Riyadh, a massive wave of damaging public disclosures erupted regarding Prince Andrew, including highly controversial historical photographs that reignited global media scrutiny. For weeks leading up to this moment, the prince's office had been aggressively pressuring the king to issue a definitive public statement, completely distancing the family from Andrew, arguing that a failure to act decisively was causing immense damage to the institution. The king, driven by a deep-seated desire to protect his brother and avoid a highly public family rift, had delayed taking action, choosing to ignore the mounting pressure from his eldest son's advisors. Recognizing that the unfolding crisis threatened to completely overwhelm his diplomatic mission, the prince took matters into his own hands while still flying, authorizing a highly unusual independent statement expressing deep concern over the allegations. The fallout from this administrative disconnect was swift and spectacular, exposing the deep structural fractures between the two royal offices to the entire world. When the prince's aircraft finally touched down on the tarmac in Saudi Arabia, the king's office, furious at being publicly preempted by the heir, retaliated by immediately issuing its own sweeping declaration. The sovereign's statement expressed profound concern regarding the ongoing investigations and explicitly noted that the palace was prepared to cooperate fully with law enforcement authorities if approached. While the content of the message was exactly what the prince had been demanding for weeks, the deliberate decision to release it precisely as the heir stepped off the plane had a devastating impact on the diplomatic tour. The massive announcement completely monopolized the global news cycle, instantly transforming the prince's carefully planned state visit into a minor footnote, as the media focused entirely on the unfolding domestic crisis. Photographers and journalists who had traveled to Riyadh to cover the international visit looked at their phones, realized the story had shifted entirely back to London, and immediately booked flights home, leaving the diplomatic mission completely overshadowed. This astonishing sequence of events drew sharp criticism from senior officials within the civil service, who viewed the entire episode as a profound failure of institutional management and internal communication. Analysts pointed out that in any standard corporate organization, a situation where the chief executive of a subsidiary issues a major policy statement in the morning, followed by the chief executive of the parent company releasing a conflicting statement in the afternoon without any coordination, would result in immediate dismissals. The incident highlighted a frustrating reality for external observers, which is that despite the intense internal rivalries and separate administrative operations of the various royal courts, the general public views them as a single, unified entity. This internal friction became even more pronounced during the king's subsequent health challenges, a period that naturally saw a significant shift of operational authority and public expectation over to the prince's team. As the king underwent advanced medical treatments, including cutting-edge immunotherapies and specialized vaccines, his court became highly focused on stabilizing his health and planning for a long, sustained recovery. Now, with medical advisors indicating that the king may well enjoy a full, natural lifespan, his administration is actively working to claw back the institutional power that had temporarily shifted to the heir, forcefully reminding the younger generation that the current reign is far from over. The fierce struggle over the monarchy's internal finances and property portfolios reached a critical flashpoint when a highly detailed report from the National Audit Office uncovered the true nature of the family's residential arrangements. For months, official statements had subtly implied that extended family members living in substantial royal estates were contributing appropriately to their upkeep through market-rate rental agreements. However, the official audit revealed that these substantial costs were actually being heavily subsidized, with the current king quietly covering the financial differences through funds generated by the lucrative historic estate of the Duchy of Lancaster. When public scrutiny began to intensify over this controversial use of semi-public funds, the palace communication teams initiated a deeply cynical, well-worn strategy that left many long-time royal observers thoroughly astonished. Senior palace aides began actively briefing the national press that this complex financial arrangement was simply a challenging legacy that the current king had inherited from his late mother. This deliberate attempt to deflect public criticism by shifting the responsibility onto a deceased monarch who had passed away 3.5 years prior was viewed by many as an incredibly audacious and transparent piece of public relations maneuvering. Critics quickly pointed out that if the current administration truly desired a modern and financially accountable institution, the appropriate moment to implement these sweeping reforms was upon ascending the throne, rather than waiting years until an independent national audit forced the details into the open. This ongoing debate over financial transparency and corporate efficiency stands in stark contrast to the reality facing other branches of the family. who have attempted to navigate the commercial world entirely independent of the Crown's traditional safety net. The stark commercial reality of attempting to build a sustainable media empire outside the institution is perfectly illustrated by the massive reduction in operational staff experienced by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. At the peak of their early commercial endeavors, their independent production company and charitable foundation boasted a formidable team of 16 full-time, highly experienced professionals managing their global branding, public relations, and content development. Over a remarkably short period, that extensive corporate infrastructure has completely collapsed, leaving a skeletal staff of just 5 individuals, which reportedly includes the family nanny as one of the few long-term employees to remain with the organization. While early, high-profile multi-million-pound contracts with major streaming platforms like Netflix and Spotify provided an extraordinary influx of immediate wealth, industry experts have long questioned whether these massive deals represent a sustainable long-term business model. The dramatic downsizing of their administrative staff mirrors the challenges faced by many traditional entertainment companies, proving that immense global fame does not automatically translate into a stable, enduring commercial enterprise capable of funding an incredibly expensive private security apparatus and a lavish lifestyle. This commercial volatility highlights a profound personal and professional divide within the marriage itself, as the Duke and Duchess increasingly appear to be pursuing fundamentally incompatible long-term visions for their future. The Duke, having spent his entire life within the highly structured, protected, and dutiful environment of the royal family, reportedly struggles to comprehend the basic practical realities of the commercial marketplace. Sources close to their California circle describe an individual who remains somewhat oblivious to the actual costs of operating a massive global enterprise, occasionally exhibiting a deep financial naivety that astounds experienced business executives during high-level corporate meetings. He is described as experiencing a profound, lingering sense of loss regarding his native country, deeply missing the familiar institutional infrastructure, his lifelong friends, the built-in security, and the clear sense of purpose that came with traditional royal philanthropy. This emotional struggle is further exacerbated by the devastating realization that his brother is thriving in his role as the future monarch, completely falsifying the Duke's secret. Deeply human hope that the institution would struggle so immensely in his absence that they would eventually be forced to call him back to London for assistance. Instead, the Duke is left watching his brother blossom into a highly successful, independent leader from a distance, viewing the family's ongoing success not from a position of inner peace, but from one of profound personal isolation. Conversely, the Duchess possesses a much sharper understanding of corporate finance, commercial branding, and the intricate mechanics of modern media promotion, viewing their future through an entirely different lens. Rather than looking back toward the traditional structures of British public service, her ultimate ambition is focused on establishing herself as a highly glamorous, immensely successful lifestyle and entrepreneurial figure, akin to the major figures of modern global commerce. This fundamental divergence in their core philosophies is most vividly demonstrated by their completely contradictory approaches to personal privacy and digital media engagement. While the Duke has spent years engaged in intense emotional legal battles against national media conglomerates, passionately testifying in open court about the devastating psychological impact of public commercialization, his wife has simultaneously utilized digital platforms to heavily promote her commercial endeavors. This striking disconnect has drawn sharp criticism from observers who note the inherent irony of lecturing global audiences about the vital importance of online child safety while simultaneously sharing highly curated glimpses of their own young children on public platforms to enhance a commercial lifestyle brand. This complex situation illustrates the deep irony of their current position, where the intense desire to escape the rigid constraints of the court has ultimately led to a different, highly demanding form of public performance driven by commercial necessity. Ultimately, these parallel narratives of shifting power within London and commercial struggle in California reveal a fundamental truth about the modern mechanics of the British monarchy. The institution is moving decisively away from the large, sentimental, and financially indulgent family structures of the past, transforming into a highly streamlined, modern corporate entity that prioritizes survival and public accountability above all else. For those who remain within the system, like the York princesses, this means a rapid dismantling of historical privileges and an unyielding demand for absolute financial transparency, regardless of personal relationships. For those who have chosen to step outside the traditional system, the reality is equally uncompromising, proving that a successful commercial brand cannot be easily sustained in exile without the massive, centuries-old infrastructure of the crown to support it. As the current king continues his medical recovery and reasserts his traditional authority, and as the prince continues to build his highly efficient shadow administration for the future, the boundaries of royal duty and privilege are being permanently redrawn. The era of the sprawling extended royal family supported by unexamined public funds is officially over, replaced by a modern, pragmatic institution that views every action, every asset, and every relationship through the cold, calculating lens of long-term institutional survival.